So we've had him before, got a lot of downloads and very interested. So we want to bring him back. And so with that, we want to introduce David Shubert and welcome to the show. And glad to see you once again, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Mick, and yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. I understand it's a little bit warm where you are, and it's not quite as warm where I am. And Kindra's been out having fun. She was out on the lake. So we're all doing really busy and fun things, I guess.
Eh, Be on the lake, and I'm stuck in the desert. We'll figure that one out.
It's summertime though. It gets cold where you're at in the winter, right? So,
No, actually, where I'm at, it's not too bad.
oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, good to have you back on. Good to see you again. Good to talk.
Good to see you guys again, also.
Wonderful. Well, David, I know we have several different questions for you, but we're going to start off kind of referencing a little bit about your previous time with us in your interview and your motivation on raising awareness for parental alienation, right? Um, your big motivator you mentioned was because you want people to know they're not alone, which is so important. Mick and I preach that. That's why we're doing this. And so, can you share a specific instance or a story where connecting with another parent made a significant impact on their situation to let them know they're not alone?
Yeah, I can actually. Basically, what it kind of all goes back to 2007 when my daughter and my stepson were first abducted and taken overseas by their mother. I remember when it first happened, I kind of thought, geez, is there something wrong with me? Am I a freak of nature? I mean, why is this happening? It's like this doesn't happen to anyone else that I know of, so I really felt alone. And there were so many questions I had was craving answers to, but I didn't have the answers, and by the time I settled down in my train of thoughts and got onto the internet trying to find things out, I still couldn't find the answers. So I stumbled around for months, kicking myself, racking my brain, diving heavy into the alcohol, trying to self isolate, everything like that. Well, as time went on and I started to understand more about the phenomenon of parental abduction and parental alienation and things like that, I realized that I wasn't alone. And so I got involved in the social media aspect of it, and I learned even more. There's millions of us worldwide, but when we're first going through this, we actually do feel like we're alone. And so that's what I'm trying to do here is kind of let just much like a lot of other people, that you're not alone. Reach out. There's millions of us that'll help you.
And that's really interesting. It kind of leads us to a thought here because, okay, we said about the abduction and the alienation, but apparently your daughter reached out and reconnected to you, which is really a fascinating and wonderful story. Could you tell us a little bit about reconnecting with her and that kind of emotional side? What was that process of reconnection like? How were both of you impacted?
Well, we were apart from each other from the time that she was 2.5 until she was 17. So there was total isolation, total alienation, total everything. I mean, it was severe because you've got your different levels of alienation, and it could have been just mild or even medium on the scale. It would have been one thing, but because it was so severe, in that it'll take years before we're able to recover into any kind of normal relationship that we once had before the abduction. But I knew this going into it because I've studied this phenomenon for so many years and read the good works of Dimas Lorandos, Amy Baker, and all these others. So I knew what to expect. I knew it wasn't going to be, flip on the light switch and everything, all the bad stuff just goes out like a light and we're going to return to the way it was. It never will happen. If we can get back even 50% of what we once experienced, I'd be happy.
Well,
You make a good point, on several different levels. We're not alone. And actually, it's very interesting. I love how we can be connected all over the world right now, right? So
Mm.
Mick is in California, you're in Colorado, and currently I am visiting a friend and I am in Kentucky. So we're all over the place and we can connect and you're not alone. However, the court systems seem to be all on the same page. No matter where you're at, messed up. It is insane. And so when we talk about that, it's challenging to navigate. Right? It can be very complex, and especially for parents dealing with parental alienation because it is, we'll call it a newer phenomenon. It's been out for a long time, but it's never been, kind of labeled, or if it is labeled, the judges don't like it, things like that. So based on your experiences, what specific changes or improvements do you think can be made to better protect parents and ensure the interests of the children are followed in the court system? And I know that's a loaded question.
Well, one thing I've always wanted to see was the inclusion of parental alienation into the DSM-5, but there's so many challenges. They've been working on trying to, get that included as a mental health disorder for decades now, and they're no closer to getting this done than what they were 30 years ago, as an example. And so it's very challenging for them. And I understand to a degree why that is. Now they do recognize that alienators, while most of them suffer from a form of mental illness, such as being narcissistic or borderline personality, which are the two most prevalent ones of the bunch. I mean, but they could be bipolar or whatever in mixed, and they can actually carry multiple underlying mental health issues. So they recognize that these alienators do suffer from that. But as far as alienation itself, they haven't figured out a way to deem parental alienation a mental health issue. Now, that's one aspect. But the other thing is we need to do more studies and, research studies. Here in the United States, we lead the world in policy changes on every aspect, be it crime or whatever. These research studies need to take effect, and that way there they can get into the hands of the right ones. Now you've got all these researchers out there, but that do their own stuff, but not enough of them. And they're not doing it on quite the large scale that needs to be done, which is on an international scale. Because if you can get the right studies done, then policymakers can take that and hopefully affect good policy decisions and retooling of what's currently out there.
So I have just a follow-up question to that, David. Can you explain for anybody that didn't hear our previous conversation, anybody that's new to this, what DSM-5 is and what parental alienation syndrome is versus a parental alienator? And we're not experts, right? But we're all learning together. So, but just a disclosure.
Okay, can you do me a favor?
Yes.
You caught me off guard because guess what? My dog was in the background and she barked, and I'm looking over to see what she's barking at.
You're fine. So,
We can
right,
interview her.
hasn't heard us before, hasn't, heard us talk or has heard this is maybe their first podcast listening about it. Can you explain what the DSM-5 is, what parental alienation syndrome is versus the parental alienator, right? And why that's important that the syndrome has to be diagnosed in DSM-5. So again, we're not experts, but to your best knowledge.
Okay, first of all, there is a difference between parental alienation and parental alienation syndrome. A lot of people kind of think they're the same thing, but they're not. Okay. Parental alienation syndrome is not scientifically proven. Okay. And it's actually a debunked theory. Now, parental alienation is itself is where one parent will turn the child against the other parent. And they'll do that through many different forms. It could be through lies, it could be through manipulation, it could be through threats of withholding their love to the child if they don't conform to that alienating that parent's form of thought. Now, an alienator, they in themselves, basically what they're doing, there's three characteristics that I've always believed in, and I actually talking to Amy Baker and a few other of the top people, they agree with me. They all share three different characteristics. Okay. And they are control, money, and revenge. Okay. Now, as far as the money aspect, they all seem to be greedy for some reason, but it goes hand in hand. They use that greed in the revenge factor because they all have this thing. Okay, you know, you don't want to be with me. We can't be together. So I'm going to get revenge on you because I'm not going to have these other people, my family, my friends, my coworkers thinking that it was my fault that we couldn't make our relationship work. So I'm going to get revenge on you because you're making me look bad. Now, how am I going to get revenge on you? Well, I'm going to get revenge on you because I'm going to, make sure that you have no relationship with your children. I'm going to come after you for all the money I can in alimony, child support, and everything else like that. And if I can get you for anything else, there comes the money. Now, as far as the control factor of that, you have to look at it this way. When you're with an alienator, they have control of you in all aspects of your life, mentally, emotionally, and physically. However, when you are no longer with them, they will do everything they can to, because they hate to lose control of anything, be it their home, their work, their relationship. So losing you, they want to reclaim a portion of that control again. The best way to do that is your emotion. How do they do that? Again, they go after your children because they know that for the targeted parent, the one thing they hold most deeply and hate losing the most is their child, the life that they helped bring into this world. So when they lose that child, now the alienator is controlling the emotion. So they've regained part of that control that they are seeking.
That's a interesting aspect of the control. But here's the situation of a person who is been alienated. They need to express themselves. And one of the common questions that we get, and I hope you can address this, because alienating parents use social media against the targeted parent, but then they also can turn around and use that evidence in court. How is it possible for a person who wants to cry out in their pain and agony, but then they also have to be very cautious about what they're doing publicly and on social media, or else they're going to have some repercussions in court? How do you strike
Oh,
that
yeah.
balance?
Just like I write about parental alienation all the time and have since 2016 when I was living down there in Panama. I started this up. And what I've done is I've been very careful. I don't, because I knew eventually my ex wife was going to find out that I was on social media because that's what they do. A lot of parents don't seem to realize their alienating former spouse is checking up on them. And if they're not, then their friends or other their alienator's family is, or maybe even the attorney. You got to be careful on what you say. I don't mention my ex-wife's name. I don't mention where she's located. I don't even mention what her occupation is. You just talk about what you're going through, what other people are going through. You talk about the dynamics of this situation as far as in general terms. You're able to get out all the toxic emotions that's inside of you and help people in the process without involving your own personal life as far as your ex spouse.
Same for the children too. You don't want to mention the kids' names at all.
No, and I never do. If anyone is, for those that followed me all these years, they'll know that I never mention their names.
Mm. Good to know. Good advice, David. Very good advice. So, we know parental alienation from our side as a parent, going back to the DSM-5, that is parental alienation syndrome. That is where the children are affected, and they are then rejecting the parent to an evil degree, calling them by their first name, hating them for maybe serving them salad, things like that, right? That is what the kids are experiencing. To focus back on what you were talking about and what we experience in being alone as parents during this time, what would you say are the common emotions or challenges that some of us face as parents? And how do you suggest that people cope with them? Or how have you coped with them?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have to come out with, actually, there's a few of them. Number one, we have to recognize that most times, not always, but most times, that what happened is not our fault. That we happen to just get roped into an individual who is wearing a mask of deception, cinched up so tight, it hid the true person that they really were. And it wasn't until later on, especially after children entered the picture, and they both, and by that time, they, with the presence of children, they had us fully ensnared into their web of deceit. That's when their mask of deception starts to lower down, and they are revealed for who they really are. Okay. When that happens, we look at ourselves and go, you know what? I wasn't the one who caused this. I married the wrong person. They're the ones who has the issue. And it goes back to what I also said. Remember, most alienators, not all, because there are other things, that go on with alienators besides underlying mental health issues. So, in realistically, you married a nutbag. If you want to,
Love
you
you,
really
David.
did. I mean,
You're
hey,
so honest.
Tell us what you really think.
well, how else could you put it? I mean,
It's not
they
your
have,
fault. You married the nutbag. Got it.
well, they hid who they were behind that mask. They're real. I mean, they're the greatest actors in the world. They could get an Academy Award for their acting abilities, because they're able to hide who they are. They play a certain role in order to rope you into. And the thing is that you think that you chose that person to be in your life. That really isn't the truth. I actually wrote an article, probably 6 or 8 months ago, and after doing some research, it's the alienator who chooses you. You think you're choosing them, but that's actually not true. They are actually looking for a set type of person to bring into their life that they can control. Remember how I talked to you about that being one of the things that they hate losing most is control? Well, they're looking for a person that they can control, put in their life,
So, how
right?
do we as parents deal with that? How did you deal with that? How did you emotionally go through that? Is there suggestions and ways to cope with that and make you feel not guilty? Right? Because that's where we all start is guilt. And Mick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we all first start, what did we do? Right? We feel guilty. So, how do you come out of that?
You educate yourself and
Thank
you
you.
examine yourself. You, you know, you go, well, gee, because I remember myself when it first happened, I'm like, oh my God, I must be a freak of nature I'm the only one that this has ever happened to in the entire world. When I found out it wasn't the truth and I started to educate myself, that was the most powerful thing that I could have ever done for myself is I learned about parental alienation because before it actually happened to me, dad and even parental abduction, I never even heard of those terms before, so once I did learn those terms, I wanted to know everything about it and how to deal with it, how to cope with it, and learn to self heal and things like that. Because that's the thing there is once you get that knowledge and stuff about what it is and come to the realization that you are not the person that caused it, that you're not the person at fault, you can start taking and stop beating yourself up and take that boot off your back that you've been wearing, keeping you down with your emotions, so you've got to do that. And the way to do that is learn coping techniques and self healing and things like that. And part of that is that stop this self isolation, stop this pity party that's going on in your life, start living life again. I mean, don't stop fighting for your children or doing what you're doing to bring them back into your arms, but stop, you know, beating yourself up over what happened. You've got to go ahead and live your life continuously. go to movie night with friends, or dinner once a week with the family, go out fishing, go on a road trip once in a while, go to the gym, take a cooking class, whatever. Don't stop living, because that is part of your self-healing process, but also part of, the coping mechanism. Now, another thing that's interesting, and I just did an article for, because I'm a content writer for a couple of different places. I think, Mick, you actually saw the one that actually came on board with recently.
I did. Yes.
But I wrote an article for Parental Alienation Awareness over in the UK, and they had asked me to write them up an article for both their blog and also their newsletter about coping. And one of the things there that I put in there that a lot of people don't recognize as a coping mechanism is you have to get involved as an advocate to fight for other people's rights to be a parent, the children of that are involved in this, because when you become and get involved in this, that's actually a coping mechanism. So I encourage everyone to, don't hide behind the computer as far as reading these things and not responding. Don't think that, okay, I can read these things. I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to share different things like that. That's not a coping mechanism when you hide behind the curtain.
One of the things I was curious about, because you kind of said a little bit about it, people have stigma and shame. And I said, yeah, it's definitely. When I'm writing out my story, I go, well, look, I look like a loser, right? I made a mistake. There's a lot of shame involved in what happened, even though you're saying it's not really my fault. I didn't do anything. But I was wondering if there are some suggestions that you can make about how society can understand and support parents and children who are experiencing parental alienation. What sort of steps would help reduce that stigma and shame that's associated with things like a failure of marriage or a failure of going through a process such as the courts?
Probably the biggest thing, just like with myself, when this all first happened, I told you that what helped me the most was learning to educate myself about what all parental alienation is, what it entails, what does a parent go through, what are the different levels that you're going to, experience, things like that. Well, that's the same thing with people not understanding. That's like that first book that I wrote. You know, uh, it has a little of something for everyone, because I remember when I first started going through all this, nonsense. And yes, I call it nonsense and a game and everything else like that, for lack of better terms. But what it amounts to is that I had all these questions, but no answers. So when I finally did decide to write this book, I did it in a format that they were actually kind of questions, that were in the book, but I took in the different scenario questions and I wrote them into articles that explains it. And it can go on for the mental aspect of what an alienated parent goes through, the child. Also, it talks about the things, what reification and what goes on with everything like that. It even includes some stuff for step parents and grandparents and things like that. And so anyone who doesn't understand parental alienation, that would be a great book, because it doesn't focus in on just one different, one single aspect like a lot of books out there do. Like a lot of these books are out there that say, okay, well, parental alienation and divorce. Okay, great. Now break it down into different subtopics on that, or parental alienation and the narcissist. Okay, well, there's more than just a narcissist that commits this.
Yeah.
I wanted to reach out and break it down into so many different subtopics that anyone who doesn't know about parental alienation and needs to learn about it, that would be a great way to do it, because it takes it on so many different levels.
David, what's the name of that book and where can they find it?
It's called Parental Alienation Unmasked. And they can find out actually either through my author's website or on Amazon.
And who's your author?
Huh?
Who's your author? What website?
Me, the old,
You. through your website, not your author then,
Right.
or your author or
No,
Amazon.
the website is called Shubert, and that's Shubert, schubertbooks.com. And I
Perfect.
actually post a lot of my blog articles on there as well,
Wonderful.
so they can go there to read some of the different things I write about.
Wonderful.
And actually, it's even got my first real book that I actually published is my memoir, and it talks about my marriage to my former wife. It talks about the abduction. It talks about the alienation. It talks about my having to go through the court systems and everything else like that. And so I think it's important. Now, everyone can keep saying, well, we've got a book out there inside of me. I want to do it. Well, get off your butt and write it. It doesn't take that long. Believe it or not, I wrote 71,000-page memoir regarding all this, putting myself out there, letting him. I didn't hold anything back. I even talked about my own downsides, you know, but I did it in 3 weeks, believe it or not.
Great. Yeah,
You
that's
know,
wonderful. And it's like it's healing, right? For like you're saying, it's healing. It's like journaling. It's healing for everybody to just get your story out there. Whether you publish it or not, writing about it helps.
oh yeah, it does. So journaling is another great, self-healing technique. So yeah, if you wanted a personal journal, if you want to write on social media, if you want to write a book, whatever, just get those toxic emotions out of you.
Yeah, so agree. So speaking of toxic emotions, right? It can have long-term effects on both the children and the parents. So, in your efforts to raise awareness, what specific initiatives are you undertaking to address those mental and emotional well-beings of parents and children?
Well, if you that book I was just talking about, and it's also in my upcoming book, I am a big advocate that you should never turn away from, people that can help you, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a coworker, or getting into therapy. Because my book, just damn near every one of my chapters talks about the need to go in and get counseling. Believe it or not, even after all these years, I'm in therapy. And I'm supposedly my therapist, she goes, well, I wonder, do you really even need to be in here? I said, well, I'm still going through courts overseas. So every time I think things settle down, it gets to flare up. And she agrees with me. I mean, I'm still going through court, believe it or not. My kids are grown.
The gift that
That
keeps on
bothers
giving, they
me.
say.
Right?
The gift that keeps on giving, they say.
Oh, yeah. Like a bad penny, it keeps rolling back every couple of years. And I'm getting tired of it.
You make a good point, and I'm gonna interrupt here, make our flow that we had for a second, because he said we had talked about the court systems and asked about that before, and I had pointed out where we were across the U.S. But you, David, are even dealing with courts across the U or across the country, right? I mean, and they don't recognize this. Is that correct?
International.
Yeah.
We don't recognize parental alienation.
Yeah. Do they or do they not, or how do they view that?
They're about like the US. They recognize it and they don't recognize it. And, you know, some countries are more jaded. As an example, I had a doctor, a psychologist over there in Puerto Rico who reached out to me just recently, actually just a few days ago, that he and another doctor, they wrote a book on parental alienation in Spanish over in Puerto Rico because they're trying to change,
Mm.
and they're a territory of the U.S., but it's worse over there than it is here in the mainland. They're trying to change the mindset that it's not just men that are doing this crap, that women do it also, and so it's like, I think in the UA in the world, there's only 5 countries that actually recognize parental alienation and actually are doing things to, uh, stamp it out. And they're actually putting alienators, when proven in court, they're putting them in jail, you know? And I think it's great. I think that Huh?
100%. It needs to happen 100% because the only way they're going to learn is to have repercussions on their actions.
In what
Well,
countries?
I
Yeah,
think,
what
huh?
countries? Yeah, what
In
countries? Let's
what
move there, right?
countries? I'm ready to move. What countries?
Well, Brazil is the first one that comes to mind. Mexico, in certain areas of Mexico, is another one, and then there's, three others. I think it's Spain is one of them,
Mm.
and then there's a couple more. I forget. I'd have to look it up in my stuff. It's been a while since I've written about it. But here's my thing. I've written about that they need to criminalize it, but as far as what should happen to these alienators, I think it should be decided on, you know, a case by case basis. Because as I mentioned, and this is true, that they majority of them have a underlying mental health issue. If that's the case, they many times they can't help themselves for the actions that they do, but they can be curtailed. So that means that, okay, in severe cases, if they're not willing to accept help, then yes, jail should be a motivator. A fine could be another motivator because let's face it, they all love their money. They like taking it away from the target parent and anyone else they can get it from, but you take it from them, that's going to piss them off. And myself, I don't mind pissing them off. I do that to my ex-wife anyway. That's the reason she wishes I was dead, I'm sure, but I live long enough just so I can piss her off. You know?
So living well is the best revenge, they say.
Oh, I hear you. And so, but I mean, it could be jail, it could be fining him, it could be a combination of that, but it could also be taking away their children, not letting them have access to the children for a minimum of 90 days while they are in treatment, so they can recognize the harm they're causing the children. I mean, it's a case by case basis of where that all should lead, and I mean, I'd love to say that one size fits all, but that's not true. But here's the other thing about it. It may not be a mental health issue because some of these people, they may have grown up in a household where parental alienation and control was very domineering. Well, they grow up throughout their life thinking that this is a normal and accepted behavior. And so they bring it up and bring it into their own future families, thinking that it's normal and it's not. Okay. So they have to be retaught that no, it is not normal. It is not accepted. What you're doing is actually hurting the children. The other thing is that they may have had unresolved issues going on in their life, going all the way back to childhood that have never been resolved. It could be unresolved issues that happened in their marriage. Maybe it dealt with infidelity. Maybe it dealt with monetary problems. Maybe it was differences of opinion that these issues were never resolved. So, I mean, these things have to be taken on a case by case basis.
We had mentioned earlier that, and I did see the article you're doing in the UK, but as we sort of wind things down, I understand that you are very active in terms of writing. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then also, last but not least, of course, I understand you have another book in the offing. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And of course, how would people get a hold of you too?
All right. Well, as you know, as we just talked about, obviously I'm now writing for Parental Alienation Awareness over in the UK. I am now a contributing writer for a national family preservation network. We've been around, for 30 plus years, and so I'm writing for them as well. And I've got a couple of other organizations. One of them, a very prominent one, I won't say until it's actually comes to total fruition, but I have several organizations that want me to write for them, and things like that. So, and that's encouraging because it helps them out with their members as far as showing support. It puts me out there in the things I write about to an even greater audience, you know, uh, to show them solidarity. Now, as far as my next book, it's kind of a companion to the first one, but it's written in a little bit different format because the first one is more of a question and answer type guidebook. In fact, is even with that first book, at the end, I did a Google search for the top 10 questions that most alienated parents will ask. and I let Google come up with the answers of what the top questions were. Well, I took them, I did my research on it. I came up with the answers in article form. So that I have that as well. But now I have that aspect at the end of the book as well. But the format of it is it's answering a lot of things that the first one didn't, but it's not a question and answer type format book. And that one there is called Parental Minefield. And I hope to have that hopefully out by the end of August.
Love it. Parental minefield.
Well, thank you so much, David, for being our guest today. And do you have a one other way? How do people get a hold of you? I think you had said your website. Maybe you can remind people that as well so they can get a hold of you.
Yeah. I mean, they can reach me out through Facebook without a doubt at hopefulfather.com or hopeful father, I should say, or they can go to my website, www.schubertbooks.com. That's Shubert, and they can always message me there.
Wonderful. And I see all your books up here. We hope to see that new one up there very soon. And are you also on LinkedIn or Twitter?
I am. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, which is APA Parental Hero or something like that. My son set it up for me a long time ago, but I never pay attention to what I'm called. I just post on it.
Well, they can
Uh,
find you by, I'm sure, Googling David Shubert.
right. And then on LinkedIn, which is where I find a lot of my strong contacts for forensic psychologists and attorneys and, things like that. And I post a lot of my stuff on there. And that's Parental Alienation Activist. Or you can just probably look me up at David R. Shubert.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, David. Appreciate all the advice and all the counsel that you gave us. I learned a lot, and hopefully people will reach out. Thanks for being our guest today.
All right, guys, it was a pleasure, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You too.